The morning of my university graduation dawned bright and clear, a perfect June day that felt like a personal promise from the universe. I stood in my cap and gown, the stiff fabric a strange weight of accomplishment on my shoulders, and called my mom for the third time. Each unanswered ring had tightened something in my chest, a familiar coil of hope and dread that I had carried for as long as I could remember. When she finally picked up, her voice was breathless, distracted, the background noise of a busy kitchen spilling through the speaker. "We're just so proud of you, sweetie," she'd said, the words landing with the familiar, breezy dismissal I had learned to recognize since childhood. "But you know how your brother is. This promotion, it's a big deal. A manager at 24. We'll have a little dinner for you next week, okay?" I swallowed the familiar lump in my throat, the one that had been forming since I was 12 years old. Watching my parents miss my science fair win because Liam had a baseball game. I had stood by my volcano project for 3 hours, waiting, and when they finally arrived, they had apologized with distracted kisses, and spent the entire car ride home discussing Liam's batting average. That lump had never really gone away. It had just become a permanent part of me, something I carried like a stone in my pocket. "But Mom, it's my graduation," I said, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "I'm the first person in our family to get a master's degree." There was a pause, a beat of silence that I mistook for consideration. Then she sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of being asked to care about something that wasn't centered on her son. "And we are so proud," she repeated, the words hollow now, automatic like a prayer recited without faith. "But this is Liam's moment. You understand, don't you? Family comes first. Family comes first." The phrase had been the anthem of my childhood, the justification for every missed recital, every forgotten parent-teacher conference, every birthday party that was cut short because Liam needed something, wanted something, demanded something. Family came first, but somehow I was never quite included in what family meant. I was the afterthought, the easy child, the one who didn't make a fuss, who got good grades and stayed out of trouble and never, ever asked to be the priority. I did understand. I had understood it my entire life. Liam, my older brother, was the sun, burning bright and demanding, and my parents were planets orbiting his every whim. I was merely a small moon, expected to be grateful for the reflected warmth, expected to exist quietly in his gravitational pull without ever daring to ask for an orbit of my own. His student baseball games were family pilgrimages, complete with matching shirts and homemade signs. My academic awards were met with a nod and a distracted, "That's nice." Before the conversation pivoted back to Liam's upcoming games, Liam's college applications, Liam's latest drama. His tantrums were managed with patience and concern. My quiet disappointments were ignored entirely, dismissed as me being the easy one, the one who didn't need anything. I looked at the 2 empty seats in the third row, the seats I had reserved for them months ago, with a hope that felt foolish now. Around me, the world was a blur of joy and celebration. Friends were hugging parents, siblings were jostling for photos, grandparents were wiping away tears. The air was thick with pride, with the shared acknowledgement of accomplishment, with the simple, profound act of showing up. My best friend, Chloe, squeezed my hand, her presence the only anchor keeping me from drifting entirely into the numbness spreading through my chest. Her parents had driven 6 hours to be here. They had made a sign with her name spelled in glitter. They had cried when her name was called. "They're not coming," she asked softly, her eyes full of the pity I hated, the pity that confirmed what I already knew, that this was not normal, that I was not wrong to feel the absence like a physical wound. I shook my head, forcing a smile that felt like a crack in a dam. They had a thing. When I walked across the stage, I kept my eyes forward. I shook the dean's hand, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the official photograph. Later, I posed for photos with Chloe and her family, letting myself be folded into their warmth for just a moment, pretending that their pride was enough. But when I returned to my empty apartment that evening, the framed diploma sitting on the coffee table, like a monument to an achievement no one had witnessed, I scrolled through social media and found them. My parents, beaming. My brother, holding a ridiculously oversized novelty check from his company. A banner behind them read, "Congrats, Liam, Pay-One Manager." There was a cake. There were dozens of comments from relatives who had never once commented on my posts about graduate school applications, research papers, late nights in the library. I liked the photo. My thumb hovered over the comment box, over the reflexive, "Congrats, Liam," that I had typed 1,000 times before, but I couldn't bring myself to type the lie. Instead, I closed the app, took off my cap and gown, and folded them neatly, placing them in the back of my closet. I sat on the floor for a long time, staring at nothing. The tears I had been holding back for years did not come. Instead, something else happened. Something in me didn't break. It went quiet. It went still. And in that stillness, it began to harden into something new, something resolute. That was the night I stopped waiting to be seen, and decided I would become someone who could not be ignored. For the next 6 months, I didn't cut my family off. That would have been too dramatic, too confrontational, too much like the kind of scene Liam would have caused. Instead, I simply stopped performing. I stopped being the one to initiate calls, the one who filled the silences with updates about my life, the one who pretended that their distracted nods and quick topic changes didn't leave me feeling erased. I stopped texting reminders about my accomplishments, stopped sending invitations to events I knew they wouldn't attend, stopped offering pieces of myself for them to overlook. At first, they didn't notice. Why would they? The satellite had gone quiet, but the sun was still burning bright, demanding all their attention, all their energy, all their love. Liam got another promotion, this one to regional manager, and my parents threw themselves into the celebration with the kind of enthusiasm they had never mustered for any of my achievements. They went on a celebratory trip with him, a long weekend at a resort that I only learned about when I saw the photos on my cousin's Instagram feed. There they were, my parents, toasting with champagne, their arms around my brother, their faces radiant with pride. I stared at the images for a long time, waiting for the familiar ache to rise in my chest, but something had shifted. The ache was still there, but it was quieter now, muffled by the growing recognition that I had spent my entire life chasing a version of love that was never going to look the way I needed it to. 3 weeks passed without a call. Then 4. I filled my days with the quiet work of rebuilding. I went for long runs along the waterfront, letting the rhythm of my feet against the pavement replace the restless energy that used to fuel my desperate bids for attention. I started cooking proper meals for myself, learning to enjoy the ritual of chopping vegetables, the smell of garlic in olive oil, the satisfaction of creating something nourishing with my own hands. I painted in the evenings, my small apartment slowly filling with canvases that no one else would see. And I found a freedom in that, in creating for myself rather than for an audience that had never really been watching. When my mom finally called after a month of silence, her voice held a note of confused irritation, as though I had been the one neglecting her, rather than the other way around. "Haven't heard from you in a while," she said, the words clipped, impatient. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said, and for the first time in my life, I didn't offer any details. No mention of the job interview I had aced, the one that would take me to Seattle, 2,000 miles away from everything I had ever known. No mention of the new friends I was making, the painting that was actually starting to look like something, the quiet, fulfilling life I was building for myself in the space they had left empty. I simply let the silence stretch between us, comfortable for me, uncomfortable for her. "Well, okay," she said after a pause, her relief palpable. She didn't ask what I had been doing. She didn't wonder why I had stopped calling. She simply accepted my silence as she had always accepted my presence, as something that required no effort, no curiosity, no real attention. "Liam's been so busy, we've been helping him look at houses. You know how he is with big decisions. He needs us there to talk things through." I did know. He was indecisive, impulsive, prone to dramatic crises that required my parents to drop everything and rush to his side. They had always been his personal research team, emotional support squad, and financial safety net, while I had learned to figure things out on my own, because there was never anyone there to help me. I hung up the phone and went back to packing, each box I sealed feeling less like an escape and more like a homecoming. The loneliness was sharp at first. There is a particular grief in realizing that the people who should know you best have no interest in knowing you at all, that the family you have been longing for exists only in your imagination. There were nights I stared at my phone, my thumb hovering over the call button, a primal part of me craving the familiar ache of their attention, the brief hit of validation that came from hearing them say my name. But the quiet, hard thing inside me, the thing that had solidified in my empty apartment on graduation day, held firm. It whispered to me in those moments that I had spent 26 years begging for crumbs, and that I deserved a seat at the table, not a spot on the floor beneath it. I moved to Seattle with 2 suitcases and a box of art supplies. I found a small apartment with a view of the water, a cramped studio that smelled like old paint and new beginnings. I started my new job, a position that challenged me in ways I hadn't expected and rewarded me in ways I hadn't allowed myself to hope for. I made friends who asked about my day and actually listened to the answers, who showed up when they said they would, who made me realize that love did not have to feel like begging. I started therapy, and my therapist, a kind woman with sharp, perceptive eyes, asked me one question that became my mantra: what do you need to stop accepting in order to start thriving? The answer was simple and terrifying. I needed to stop accepting being an afterthought in my own life. I needed to stop accepting love that required me to shrink. I needed to stop accepting a family that only had room for me when I made myself small enough to fit into the spaces my brother left behind. The calls from my parents grew more sporadic, and each one was a performance, a script I no longer felt obligated to follow. They would ask surface-level questions. I would give surface-level answers, and the conversation would inevitably circle back to Liam. They didn't know about the painting I had entered in a local art competition. They didn't know I had started running half marathons. They didn't know the woman I was becoming. And with every week that passed, the quiet thing inside me grew stronger, feeding on the absence of their validation, building a foundation of self-worth that was mine alone, unshakable, and finally free. 6 months to the day after my graduation, I won the art competition. The timing felt like something out of a novel, the kind of cosmic symmetry that writers get accused of manufacturing, but it happened exactly that way. I had entered on a whim, encouraged by a friend from my running group who had seen one of my canvases leaning against my apartment wall and insisted I was hiding something worth sharing. I had almost talked myself out of it a dozen times, convinced that my paintings were too personal, too raw, too much like pages torn from a diary to be displayed in a gallery where strangers might see them. But something in me, the same quiet, hard thing that had stopped me from crying on graduation day, pushed me forward. I filled out the application, paid the entry fee, and submitted the piece that had been haunting me for months. The painting was called The Empty Seats. It was a large canvas, oil on linen, and it had taken me 3 months to complete. I had worked on it in the early mornings before work, in the late nights when sleep wouldn't come, in the hours when the loneliness of my new city pressed against my windows, and I needed to put the ache somewhere it could be seen. The composition was simple but deliberate. It depicted a graduation ceremony from the point of view of a graduate standing on the stage, looking out at the audience. The foreground was a sharp, clear image of a hand holding a diploma, the fingers wrapped around the leather folder with a grip that spoke of both triumph and desperation. The background was a vast sea of blurred, joyful faces, parents and siblings and grandparents, their features indistinct but their joy unmistakable. But in the third row, 2 seats were rendered in perfect, agonizing detail, empty. The light from a nearby window fell across them, illuminating the absence, making the vacancy the most vivid thing in the entire composition. I had painted those seats more times than I could count, scraping away layers, starting over, trying to capture the precise quality of light that falls on something that should have been filled, but wasn't. I painted them until I could see them with my eyes closed, until the shape of their emptiness was etched into my memory alongside the shape of my mother's voice, saying we're so proud, until I understood that I was no longer painting my parents' absence but my own survival. The painting was my pain, transmuted into something beautiful, something valuable, something that could exist in the world without apology. The competition was larger than I had realized when I entered. Over 400 submissions from across the state, juried by a panel of gallery owners and critics whose names I recognized from articles I had read in art magazines I could barely afford. I did not allow myself to hope. I had spent too many years hoping for things that did not come, waiting for attention that never arrived. And I had learned that hope was a dangerous currency in a life where nothing was ever guaranteed. I submitted my painting and tried to forget about it, throwing myself into work, into running, into the careful architecture of a life that did not depend on external validation. When the email came, I was sitting on my apartment floor surrounded by packing materials, preparing to ship a small painting to a collector in New York who had found me through an online gallery. The subject line read "Congratulations," and I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam. But something made me open it, something that had been growing in me since the day I walked across that stage alone. The email was brief. My painting had won first place. The theme had been perspective, and the judges had found my submission to be, in their words, a haunting meditation on absence and resilience that transforms personal grief into universal truth. I read the email 3 times before I let myself believe it. Then I sat very still on my floor, surrounded by bubble wrap and cardboard, and let the tears come. They were not the tears I had not cried on graduation day. Those had been tears of grief, of swallowed disappointment, of a daughter who had finally stopped believing her parents would ever choose her. These were different. These were the tears of someone who had built something with her own hands, who had taken the empty spaces she had been given and filled them with something that mattered, who had finally stopped waiting to be seen and instead became someone who could not be ignored. The exhibition was held on a Saturday night, the gallery packed with collectors and critics and artists whose work I had admired for years. Eleanor, the gallery owner, a shrewd woman with silver hair and eyes that missed nothing, had hung the empty seats in the front window, visible from the street, impossible to walk past without stopping. I stood beside it for hours, answering questions, accepting congratulations, watching strangers stand before my painting and see something in it that made them pause. A woman cried. An older man told me it reminded him of his daughter's wedding, the chair they had left empty for his wife, who had passed a year before. I listened to their stories and understood that my pain had become something larger than myself, something that connected me to people I would never meet. The painting sold on the second night. The buyers were a couple from Portland, both in their 60s, who stood in front of it for nearly an hour before approaching me. The woman took my hands and said, "I don't know what you lost, but I know you survived it. I want to live with something that reminds me survival is possible." They paid more for it than I had made in the last 3 months combined. That night, I stood in my apartment, a glass of champagne in my hand, the city lights twinkling beyond my window. I felt a strange sense of closure, the kind that comes not from forgetting, but from integrating, from taking the sharp edges of your past and setting them into a mosaic that finally makes sense. The painting was gone, out in the world, no longer my burden to carry alone. I thought about my family, about the silent distance I had maintained, about the careful way I had stopped performing my life for their approval. I thought about the girl who had sat on her apartment floor on graduation night, staring at a photo of her parents celebrating her brother, and decided she would never beg for love again. She had kept her promise to herself. I picked up my phone. I scrolled through my camera roll and found the photo Eleanor had taken of me at the gallery. I was standing next to the empty seats, a small smile on my face, my arm around the couple who had bought it. I was glowing. I looked whole. Not because my past had been erased, but because I had finally stopped letting it define me. I opened the family group chat. It had been silent for weeks. The last message was a photo of Liam's new house, the one my parents had helped him buy. I attached the photo. I did not write a long, angry caption. I did not list the months of silence, the years of neglect, the graduation day that had broken my heart. I simply typed first place in the city art competition. My piece sold tonight. Hope everyone is well. I hit send. Then I turned my phone off, finished my champagne, and went to bed. I slept without dreaming for the first time in years. When I woke up the next morning, the light coming through my window was soft and golden. The kind of Seattle morning that made all the gray days worth enduring. I made coffee slowly, deliberately, letting the ritual ground me before I reached for my phone. I sat by the window, the warm mug cradled in my hands, and watched the city stir to life below me. The water was calm, the ferries moving across the sound like slow, motion poetry. I felt something I had rarely felt in my life: peace. Not the fragile peace of avoidance, not the temporary calm of making myself small to keep others comfortable, but the deep, unshakable peace of someone who has finally stopped betraying herself. When I finally turned my phone on, the notifications flooded in. The screen lit up again and again, messages stacking on top of each other, a digital avalanche of attention that would have meant everything to me a year ago. Now, I watched them accumulate with a strange detachment, curious about what they would say but no longer desperate for their approval. My mom had replied first, her message a flurry of exclamation points that seemed to multiply with each passing minute. "Oh my God! We had no idea! This is amazing! Why didn't you tell us you were painting again? We're so proud!" Then came my dad's, more measured but still warms. "That's our girl. First in the family with a master's, now this. Quite a year you've had." Then a cascade of messages from aunts, uncles, cousins I hadn't spoken to in months, their names appearing on my screen like ghosts from a life I had walked away from. "Wow! Congratulations! That's incredible! We didn't know you were an artist!" And finally, from my brother, "Nice. Guess you've been busy." I stared at the screen for a long time. Their pride was a currency I had starved for my entire life, a validation I had chased through every missed recital and forgotten birthday, through every conversation that turned away from me the moment I started speaking. Now they were offering it freely, easily, as if it had always been there for the taking, as if I had simply forgotten to reach out my hand. The temptation to respond was overwhelming. I wanted to write back with every grievance I had ever swallowed, every slight I had ever pretended not to notice. I wanted to ask them where they had been when I needed them, why they had never asked about my paintings, why it had taken a public victory for them to see me at all. I wanted to scream into the group chat that I had been painting for years, that I had been achieving for years, that I had been alive and present and waiting for them to notice me for 26 years, and they had only ever looked at me when someone else was looking too. But I didn't. I scrolled back up to the photo I had sent, the image of me standing beside the empty seats, and I looked at it with fresh eyes. The painting in the background, the empty seats rendered in perfect, agonizing detail, the tangible proof of my pain that I had transformed into something beautiful and valuable. My face in the foreground, serene and self-possessed, the face of a woman who had stopped waiting for anyone to validate her existence. That woman in the photo did not need their approval. She had built her own. She had taken the absence they had given her and turned it into art, into a life, into a version of herself that was stronger than anything they could have shaped her into. My phone rang an hour later. My mom's name appeared on the screen, and I let it ring, watching it vibrate against my coffee table. It stopped, then started again. She called 3 times in rapid succession, the urgency in the pattern of rings telling me everything I needed to know about the anxiety that had finally taken hold of her. Then a text came through, "Can we call you? We want to hear all about it." I typed my reply slowly, carefully, each word chosen with intention. "I'm free on Sunday afternoon at 30 my time. We can talk then." For the first time in my life, I set the terms. I did not drop everything to accommodate them. I did not apologize for my schedule or make myself smaller to fit into theirs. I simply stated my availability, as if my time mattered, as if I mattered. When Sunday came, I was calm. The week between had been full of quiet work. I had gone for my runs, painted in the evenings, met friends for dinner. I had thought about what I wanted to say, not as a script to follow, but as a truth to hold. I sat in my living room, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor, and I called them on video. Their faces filled the screen, and I was struck by how different they looked to me now. They were the same people, the same faces I had known my entire life, but I was seeing them clearly for the first time. My mom's smile was a little too bright, a little too eager. The smile of someone trying to close a distance she had only just realized existed. My dad's eyes were tired, the corners of his mouth tight with something that might have been shame. They looked older. Or maybe I was just no longer looking at them through the haze of needing them to be something they had never been. "There she is," my mom gushed, her voice pitched higher than usual. "The big-time artist, we are just so proud of you. That painting was breathtaking. Why didn't you tell us you entered a competition?" I watched her face. The way her eyes kept darting to the side, as if checking to see if my dad was following the conversation correctly. I thought about all the times I had seen that same expression directed at someone else. At a relative who needed impressing, at a colleague whose opinion mattered. She was performing, the way she always performed. And for the first time I saw it without the desperate hope that underneath the performance was something real. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I said. My voice was even, neither accusatory nor defensive. It was simply a statement of fact, the truth of my life spoken aloud without the armor of resentment I had worn for so long. The words hung in the air between us, visible in the way my mom's smile faltered, in the way my dad shifted in his seat. "Of course we'd be interested," my dad said, his voice gruff in a way I recognized as discomfort. "You should have told us." I let the silence stretch, giving them space to hear what they had just said. "You should have told us." As if the responsibility had always been mine, as if I had been hiding from them instead of surviving their neglect. "I called you the morning of my graduation," I said, still calm, still steady. "You told me you couldn't come because Liam's party was more important. That was the last time I asked any of you to show up for me." The silence that followed was sharp and absolute, a vacuum that seemed to suck the air out of the room. My mom's face crumpled, her carefully constructed brightness collapsing into something raw and unguarded. My dad looked away, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on something outside the frame of the camera. I watched them process what I had said, watched the weight of it settle onto their shoulders, and I did not rush to make it lighter. I had spent my entire life making things lighter for them, absorbing their guilt so they would not have to feel it, and I was done. "That was different," my mom stammered, her voice cracking. "Liam needed us that day. You always seemed so independent. You never needed us the way he did." The words were familiar, so familiar I could have recited them in my sleep. They were the story my parents had told themselves for years, the justification that had allowed them to pour everything into Liam and leave me to figure out how to raise myself. I was the easy one, the one who didn't need anything, and they had used my competence as permission for their neglect. "You never let me," I said. The quiet, hard thing inside me finally spoke, not with anger, but with the authority of someone who had spent years learning to articulate a truth that had been denied. "You were so busy managing his needs that you never created any space for mine, so I stopped having them. Or, at least, I stopped showing them to you." Tears were streaming down my mom's face now, her carefully applied mascara leaving dark tracks on her cheeks. "We made mistakes," she said, her voice breaking. "We know we did. But we love you? You're our daughter." I did not doubt that they loved me. I had never doubted it, not really. Their love was real. In the way that a house with a leaking roof is still a house, in the way that a garden choked with weeds is still a garden. It existed, but it had never been enough to shelter me, to nurture me, to make me feel like I belonged. "I know you love me," I said, and I meant it. "But love isn't the same as showing up. And for 26 years, you've shown up for him, and you've left me sitting in empty seats." I let the words settle, watching them land. I did not yell, I did not cry. I simply stated the truth of my life, and the truth was a heavy, immovable thing. A stone placed in the center of the room that neither of us could walk around. I'm not sending you that photo to get your approval, I said finally. The words came from a place I had only recently discovered, a place of self-respect that had grown in the space where my desperation used to live. I sent it to show you what I built without it. I'm not asking you to change the past. I'm telling you what the future looks like for me. I will no longer be available to be the daughter who waits for you to notice her. I'm the woman who notices herself now. I paused, watching their faces, watching the way my dad had finally turned back to the camera, his eyes wet in a way I had never seen before. If you want to be in my life, it will be on the terms that I set, and those terms are that you show up, consistently, for me. Not just after I succeed, but before. Not just when it's easy, but when it's hard. Can you do that? My dad cleared his throat. He looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in my life. I saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been recognition, might have been grief, might have been the first fragile stirrings of understanding. That's a fair question, he said quietly. We've been unfair. It's going to take us time to learn how to do this differently. I nodded. I had time. I had spent 26 years learning to survive their absence, and I could give them time to learn how to be present. I'm not going anywhere, I said. But I'm also not waiting. I had spent enough of my life waiting. My mom nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, the gesture so vulnerable, so unlike her usual polished composure, that I felt something soften in my chest. We'll try, she said. We will. We talked for a few more minutes after that, lighter things. I told them about the exhibition, about Eleanor, about the couple who had bought the painting. I told them about my running group, about my apartment with the view of the water, about the life I had built without them. They listened in a way they never had before, asking questions, following up, staying on the line even when the conversation strayed from topics they could easily answer. When we hung up, I did not feel the euphoria of victory or the relief of reconciliation. I felt the quiet satisfaction of having drawn a line, not in anger but in self-respect, and of having been heard. I walked over to my bookshelf. My diploma, the one they had not seen me receive, was framed and hanging on the wall above it. Next to it, I placed a small print of the empty seats, that Eleanor had made for me, a reminder of what I had created from the wreckage of what I had been given. I stood back and looked at them, side by side. The two pieces of paper that represented the two most important things I had ever done. I had earned my place in the world, and then I had refused to apologize for it. My phone buzzed again, and I picked it up to find a text from my dad, a rare thing. He had sent a photo of my painting, the one he had screenshot from the gallery's website, and beneath it he had written, "I'm sorry we missed the day, but I'm proud of the woman who made this. And I'm proud you made us see." I smiled, a real smile, and put the phone down. The old ache was still there. A scar rather than an open wound, a part of my history that I no longer needed to hide or explain away. But it was no longer a blueprint for my life. I had stopped being the girl in the empty seats. I had become the woman who paints her own story, frame by frame, and decides for herself what belongs in the picture. And that, I finally understood, was worth more than all the applause in the world.